Yes, thank you for taking my call. I had this question because the church, you see, since the 19th century and the 20th century was proposing the culture of life, and then you see after Nazi Germany, the war broke out, people suffered tremendously, and then when they got back from the war, you had family life, tremendous family life, and the baby boom. And then immediately 20 years later, you had the sexual revolution, and then into the culture of death. So I'm wondering, what is it that caused that change? Was it not that we were listening to the church, or was you listening to the church? What caused this problem?
Well, it's a very complicated issue. I think you can look at several factors that may have been great promoters of the sexual revolution, and that led to such a great contrast between one generation and the next. You know, oftentimes we like to avoid suffering, but suffering does make us stronger, and the cross is a great example of that, of course. And the greatest generation, as they're called, they endured quite a bit of suffering and self-sacrifice and selflessness. And that made them a very strong generation and really made it so that when they came back here, they built this country in many great ways and were very generous. And they had lots of children. But maybe the affluence that followed that was not the best thing for their children. And their children then became the baby boomer generation, which, of course, we've seen a lot of their pitfalls and a lot of their excesses, maybe because they had too much handed to them. Now, that may be one of the reasons. The other big reason that I think is very important, that in some ways went hand in hand with that, is the availability and the acceptance of contraception, especially the birth control pill. And we see that was quite a promoter of the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution would not have occurred without it. There may have been people who would have wanted it to occur, but they wouldn't have been able to carry forth their plan without the birth control pill. Because what the birth control pill did was that it took away some of the perceived consequences of sexual intercourse. And so when you no longer felt that there were consequences of sexual intercourse, well then having sexual intercourse outside of marriage, which marriage is sort of a built-in way to cope with and to deal with the consequences of sexual intercourse, that is children. And it's the healthy way to deal with them and to have an intact family. But if children were no longer perceived as a consequence, well, then having sex outside of marriage was fine and acceptable, as well as having extramarital sex when you're already married. And so you could see then how that would lead to the deterioration of the family. And indeed, if you look at statistics, you can see that as the birth control pill use increased, the divorce rate in our country increased, really in a parallel fashion. And when the birth control pill saturated the market and all women who wanted it had it, then you could see that in parallel with that plateau, the divorce rate plateaued. You can also see that the abortion rate increased very much in parallel to the birth control pill use rate. And in fact, the U.S. Supreme Court in the Casey case has stated that any society that allows contraception and where the contraception has become such a pivotal part in people's lives, as it has here in the United States, well, that country, that society must have abortion as a backup in case that contraception fails. So I see that it's all intertwined, and I think that's kind of what happened here in our society. Of course, you can trace a lot of this back to, centuries before, of course, with the Enlightenment, and where, modern Europe kind of decided that God was no longer that important, and that reason was so important, and that man was the master, humans were the masters of their own destiny, and that instead of being stewards of our bodies and of what God has given us, that we were now masters. And, of course, that was a big part of it. And then, the church was really caught off guard in the Western world. The church was sort of going along its merry way and thought that everything was great and was accepting that everything was good in society, and really was caught off guard and allowed all this to sneak in. And the culture of the sexual revolution and the culture of death really took the lead on not just the revolution itself, but also on the rhetoric used. And so the church was really caught backpedaling, And the church was also caught, of course, in the pedophile scandal, and that was because of poor formation of priests, because in many regards because of the church sort of accepting a lot of the principles and the premises of the sexual revolution. And so a lot of that was very, very unfortunate. Now, of course, the church has rebounded, and I think the church is finally taking a strong stand against the culture of death and against the sexual revolution, and really pointing out all of the evils and the suffering that have come because of it.
Yeah, Walter, fascinating question. And Dr. Delgado, it seems that once we accepted that it was okay to kill a child in the womb, then almost anyone's fair game, and that's where it seems like it's headed. So, I mean, would you agree with that statement, that the culture of death really is, maybe it didn't start there, but it really gained steam just in understanding that some humans are throwaways in our society?
Yes, absolutely. That, the acceptance of abortion was a big promoter. There's no doubt about that. But really, before that came along, the acceptance of contraception, and especially of the birth control pill, really preceded that and really led to it. Because again, if that contraception fails, then what do you do? What's your second plan? And the second plan, of course, is to kill the unborn baby. And then, like you said, if you can kill the unborn baby, well, then why can't you kill elderly, sickly, feeble people? Why can't you kill embryos that you've created because they don't look fit under the microscope? It's the slippery slope, and you lose the value, the intrinsic value of life, or the appreciation of the intrinsic value of life when you get to that. And it also, the other part of it is with the contraception is that if you accept sterile sex, well, then what good is a marriage? Well, why is marriage so important if you can have sex without a husband or a wife, and it can be done for its own good because of the pleasure that it provides? And so all of these had great ramifications, and those two certainly were big parts of it.